Broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is the Gailey Show. I am your host, John Parker. Today is our Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest for the majority of the episode to help us think more clearly on the major issues of the day facing the queer and allied community. After that, I will continue my Queer and the Cosmos essay series. Today's guest, okay, get ready. This is a bio, folks. Today's guest is Dr. Tim Jon Semmerling. He holds a PhD in Near Eastern Languages and Cultures from Indiana University and a JD with certificate in criminal law from DePaul University's College of Law. Senior member of his partnered firm, the Mercury Endeavor, which develops mitigation strategies in state, federal, and military jurisdictions for capital and non-capital defendants in the United States and abroad. Also one of the attorneys at O'Connor and Semmerling Law Group, an Illinois criminal-based defense firm. Dr. Semmerling's books are Israeli and Palestinian Postcards, Presentations of National Self, and Evil, big quotation marks there because it is in the book title, Evil, quote-unquote, Arabs and American Popular Film, Orientalist Fear, which the Arab American National Museum, has awarded honorable mention 2006 Book Award in Adult Nonfiction. Obviously, with a bio like that, he has lectured and presented papers at universities, scholarly conferences, training conferences in the U.S., the United Kingdom, on topics such as the War on Terror, Arab and Muslim Americans, mitigation, film studies, and Mark Twain studies. So welcome to the Gailey Show, Dr. Semmerling.
I am very, very happy and very proud to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, proud. Thank you. All right. So clearly there's a lot to cover here. Maybe can we start with how did you come to wanting to focus your career on both the Middle East and death penalty cases and defense? Maybe we start with how did you come to focus on the Middle East?
How did I come to focus on the Middle East happened when I went on a trip with my mother to Egypt. And I found the most extraordinary culture there that it was just something I had never even imagined before. And I remember being woken up in the middle of the night during the call to prayer in Cairo. And it was the most extraordinary sound and truly one of the most beautiful human voice sounds I've ever heard and still have ever heard. And I said to my mother as I was going through it, I went back a number of times with her. And I finally said to her, this is what I want to make my career. I want to find out, I want to do something about Egypt and I want to find out what this culture is like. And so I was a flight attendant at the time. And I decided that I would go back to graduate school to become, to study Arabic. And I remember going in when I was in Egypt, I just wanted to constantly just sit there whenever I heard the call to prayer. And I just wanted to constantly sit there and just listen to it. And I started getting further and further away from the tour bus and getting into the cars and into the cabs with people. And they started to teach me how to read Arabic off the meters, read the numbers off the meters of the taxis. And ended up at University of Texas first. And then then went to Indiana Middlebury College for Arabic, and then ended up finding myself in the Gaza Strip and in the Palestinian territories, and did my master's thesis on the closure of Palestinian schools in Israel by the Israelis back in the first Intifada. And then I ended up doing my dissertation on political art. Which then my dissertation then became the first book that I did, which was on Palestinian and Israeli postcards on political art and the messages that were being sent overseas through the tourism trade. And so that's how the Middle East portion started. But when the war on terror began and we started to hear stories about how people were being tortured in Guantanamo or overseas elsewhere during in black sites, I realized that I had to do, and I started to see on the airplanes that I was working the rise in racism against Muslims and Arabs. I realized that I had to do something different. And so I decided I need to go back and get my, after the PhD, I need to go back and get my JD. And I end up at DePaul University doing human rights studies and became a human rights fellow there. And ended up then being picked up by one of the professors who was there in the death penalty clinic, and she said, "This is what you're going to do." And I said, "Well, I don't want to do that. I want to just be a lawyer, and I want to go in and fight these court cases in the traffic courts and stuff like that." And she said, "No, this is what you're going to do." And so she sent me in, put me into the programs to teach me mitigation, which is an area of the law that not many people know about. And so I ended up here in the mitigation area of the law and became a mitigation expert.
So a question that comes, this is a personal question that comes up for me a lot, being Armenian American, where I have a lot of unfortunately, I'm going to admit on air, I have a lot of family members who are very rabidly anti-Muslim. They cite the genocide because of that. And they're always very angry with me about being in the Twin Cities here. We have a large Muslim population at the colleges I worked at, and equity and inclusion work. We did a lot of work around interfaith dialogue and just basically having equity in the school system. And they would also point out, when I came out, they're like, "Well, you realize in Islam they're very anti-queer." And I'm like, "Hey, newsflash, you all are Christian and you're just as anti-gay." How were you squaring that particular circle, though, as you were getting to know the culture, as you were beginning to wanting to take on these death penalty cases? Like, did that ever come up at all, that intersection of queerness and Islam itself?
Yes. Well, let me start with this first. I have different lives. I'm more
Really?
than just being. Yes, I mean, I'm more than just one thing. Okay,
Hmm.
so I have my professional life, and I have my academic life, and I have my personal life as well. And so when I was overseas doing work, and in the Muslim communities, it just wasn't something that I thought about, or that I needed to think about back then when I first started. In the Palestinian areas, nobody questioned that. The big question was two things: Are you married? Okay. And what religion are you? Okay. And I'm
Yeah.
Catholic. Okay. And not a really good Catholic at the time. But are you married was always the question, and I had to come up with I came up with a closeting thing, which was to say, if I was married, I couldn't be here doing this great work that we're doing together. And that's how I got around it. Now, I wasn't in Saudi Arabia at
Hmm.
that time. I was not in Iraq. I wasn't in Iran, or I wasn't in these places or Yemen at the time. I wasn't in Yemen. That were places where they would flog you if they found out that you were gay,
Hmm.
or they would or they'd put you in prison. Or I wasn't in Afghanistan where they would dig pits and put you as a homosexual into the pits and topple brick walls upon you. So I wasn't in those areas. I was in the Gaza Strip. I was in the West Bank, and so I wasn't having to deal with those types of problems. We were dealing more with resistance issues of occupation at the time. Now, that's not how my life then ends up.
Hmm.
It ends up where I end up going down to Guantanamo. Well, first of all, what happens is that I get 6 months out of law school. 6 months out of law school, and my partner Stephen, we visited his mom, and she's got this Time magazine article out, or the Time magazine in front of her, and it's got Nidal Hassan's picture on it. Nidal Hassan was a psychiatrist who was in Fort Hood, who radicalized to be a radical Muslim, radical Islam, and he eventually then goes into Fort Hood and blows away a bunch of people and wounds a bunch of people too. I mean, we're talking 13 and 35 people. I mean, 13 people dead and 35 people hurt. And his mother says to me, "You need to help this guy. He's Palestinian." And I said, "Well, they don't want me. I just got out. I mean, we were sworn in that day as lawyers." And she says, "No, he needs your help." And 6 months later, I'm on the case. First case. They put me on that case and did extraordinary stuff with him, working through it. And he never cared if I was
Hmm.
gay or not. So those things didn't come up. They
Hmm.
just didn't come up. And in Guantanamo, when we get to that, that didn't come up until it's forced out. So, but that's part of the story that we'll get to. But so no, the answer is I didn't have to deal with those things because I wasn't in those particular places where the Sharia law was that heavy.
Right. Well, I mean, we've mentioned GTMO here. Obviously, I know that I'm glossing over a lot here because we have a lot of limited time here. How did you come? Well, actually, no, back up. Why did you want to take on that particular case?
Guantanamo.
With Fort Hood.
Fort Hood. Well,
because you could have. I mean, you could have said, "No, I'm not going
sure.
to." Why be a attorney for the person to alleged to have done this?
Yeah. So here's the thing that happens. First of all, I'm going in as a human rights person, right? Because I had this great experiences in the Middle East of working with the oppressed and working with colonialism and what that affected and what that feels and what that means to resist. And so I had this I don't want to call it subversive, but I believe in resistance, and I look at resistance a lot, and I think about resistance. And so when it comes to when I was that professor who said, "This is what you're going to do," and she said to me, "You will die in a courtroom. That's just not who you are. You need to get out there and you need to find out people's stories." And so she puts me in as this mitigation person. We can talk a little bit about what mitigation does. But what happens, this is why I get on that particular case, was that the war on terror is starting right at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, or it had just started. It started actually 8 years earlier because this was in 2009 until 2001. We couldn't say that the war on terror starts. So we're at that nexus now where all of a sudden Middle East comes in with law. And so this was an opportunity to use my Arabic, to use my knowledge of Palestinian studies, to use my interest in resistance and stuff like that. But most of all is to be able to sit there and say, this is still a human being. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what this person has done, this is still a human being. And me being very anti-death penalty as well, the worst thing that you can do is put someone to death, and the second one is to put them in prison forever. Okay, so
that's a great. I want to pick it up there. I got to squeeze in a quick commercial break. I want to pick it up right there when we come back. More with Dr. Tim Jon Semmerling after this quick break. Follow us on Blue Sky for more progressive news and analysis. We're at thegailyshow.org on Blue Sky. Welcome back to the Gailey Show. I am your host, John Parker. It is 21 minutes past the hour. It is Thursday, which is our time of the week for our Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode. We are here with attorney, author, human rights defender, Dr. Tim Jon Semmerling. Dr. Semmerling, before the break, you were talking about the need for, or your desire to want to work with someone who is accused of, this Fort Hood bombing. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of, which I think some folks will remember, how this goes back even to our colonial history. I mean, the U.S. colonies of our second president, he wasn't president at the time, but John Adams, wanting to defend the British soldiers who had attacked U.S. citizens and saying that there needs to be a defense here, right? If we're going to have a rule of law, then there needs to be law here. The folks are entitled to a defense. I don't know if that's what you were thinking about when you were taking on this case, but there is a clear American legal tradition around having a right to defense.
Yes. How American is that then? That's one of the things I was going to bring up, and you just did it for me. No, how American is that then to defend somebody who needs a defense? But here, this is what's so interesting about mitigation, and we need to understand what mitigation is. Because mitigation, when you watch TV shows and you see these courtroom dramas, you're seeing only a portion of the drama of the trial, actually. So you got to think of a trial as a bifurcated trial. One is the guilt innocence portion, and the other one is the sentencing portion. Okay, the guilt innocence portion deals with how was the crime done, and did the person do it? The sentencing portion is now the person has already been convicted and they did do it in the eyes of the law. Now what they get is mitigating evidence to be presented to show why this happened. Why did this person end up before this court? And so what I do is something completely different of saying, I'm defending you because you did or didn't do it. I'm defending you. My portion of it is that we're defending on the basis of, Judge, you need to look at this person, or jury, you need to look at this person as a human being. And you need to understand that, but for the fact that you aren't in his shoes, that you didn't end up in the same place. So that we're trying to find some empathy there, and we're trying to find some mercy there on top of it. And so, mitigation is showing that person's humanity to bring them back into the fold. Now that they're marked as guilty, we want to still bring them into the fold and still bring them within society, even though that they're going to be in prison for the rest of their life, or hopefully not dead. So one of the things that I'm looking for is that we look for, frailties, that there's some failures in the person's life or some traumas that they went through, a kindness that they did, an accomplishment, some generosities that they might have, a concern for others, some hopes or some virtues that were either in their past or had happened during the crime, or happened when they were in jail at up to this particular point, or that they have in the future, that they can still be something that is not the worst of the worst. And so therefore, don't give them the death penalty, or don't give them the 60 years, give them the 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Give them some mercy, give them some understanding and some empathy. And so, one of the things is that, and the mitigating evidence that we're looking for has no limits. You can't draw a circle around it, because to do that would take away, to define it would take away the idea of what mitigation could be, because it could be anything. It could be the fact that you have a red bike, Judge. I had a red bike when I was a kid, and you had a red bike, and we make that connection, that human understanding connection, and we can see each other. The judge looks off his desk off the page is what we're looking at, trying to get that judge to see that person, or that fact finder to see that. And so when we look for it, no stone can be unturned. You must look for everything and anything possible that will help ease that sentence. And so that's what we're doing. So when I'm going in there to deal with Nidal Hassan, I'm not going in there to find out how he killed that day. What I'm going in there to find out is, who are you as a human being, so I can show people that you are not the worst of the worst, and that we can still accept you within society some way. And so that's what I do. So it's different in a lot of ways. I'm not trying to find, never am I ever trying to find an excuse for what happened. But what I'm trying to find is an explanation for what happened. And that's what we're trying to provide to the judge or to the jury, is an explanation of how could this have happened. So that's what makes it different.
Thank you for that distinction, because I think a lot of people think, oh, you're just trying to make excuses for. And I'm like, no, that's a different. As I'm thinking here, as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm like, no, there's got to be a difference here between excusing the behavior and the explanation of the behavior. So thank you for making that distinction. I do want to, because this is a big part of your story and your most recent writing about your time in Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay. How did you get to then being at that naval station and defending the folks that you were defending?
Well, I had a reputation from the Fort Hood case that we were doing really well. And I also had been on another military case out in Okinawa. And we got rid of the death penalty out there, which is a hard thing to do. But that's a huge win when you get rid of the death penalty and get that off the table. So I ended up getting a call one day, and I got a call that said, hey, I'm the new lawyer on this new case in Guantanamo, and I got your name, and can you speak Arabic? Yes. Have you done death penalty before? Yes. And then the next thing I know, the lead lawyer says, well, you're going to be hired for this case. And then I didn't hear for a couple of weeks. And then before you know it, I get the call back, and then I'm then eventually appointed onto the case. And then I have to go through the security clearances, which is a huge part of the story, right? So I go through the security clearances with the CIA. And I'm told that it's the CIA. And the CIA gets me into their office, and they sit me down and they say, we're looking over your application for a top secret security clearance. And they look at my past and they say, well, who is Stephen O'Connor? And I say, well, that's my partner. Now, I've been briefed beforehand by the lead lawyer and the second chair lawyer on the team, saying, you must tell them everything. You must tell them everything, even who you've slept with.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you can't get this job. I have to
Why
tell
did they
somebody to
say
get.
that? Why was that relevant?
Because what happens is that the when you're going for the top secret security clearance, they're trying to make sure that you're not going to get blackmailed for anything, right? If you fall into foreign hands, or that you won't be blackmailed for information. So
Well, we
I
don't
have to
care about
come.
that anymore, do we?
What's that?
We don't care about that anymore, do we? We have Russian
Oh,
assets in the
wait,
federal government.
just
Sorry,
wait.
that's a snarky progressive analysis of the current administration.
No, that's just
But it's
wait,
it's
right?
interesting to know that you were going through that process when we still sort of had,
No,
standards.
this sounds like the Lavender Scare stuff, right?
It is.
So I have to sit there and I have to say who they are, who he is, and who is my ex. Well, I have to
Mm.
say who they are, and they sit there and they tell me, well, now that they know that they're gay. Well, who else have you been sleeping with? Well,
Mm.
I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, no one. I have a monogamous relationship with my other half. And they say, well, you've been to the Middle East a number of times. You obviously you have found very handsome men there and that you would want to sleep with them. That's not what I go to the Middle East for.
Yeah, let's pick that up after this quick break. Please support our sponsors and advertisers. They keep conversations like this on the air, more progressive news and analysis. Tell them that you heard about them on the Gailey Show here on AM 950. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is the Gailey Show. I am your host, John Parker. It is our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode. It is 33 minutes past the hour. With me today is Dr. Tim Jon Semmerling. Dr. Semmerling holds a PhD in Near Eastern Languages and Cultures from Indiana University and a JD with certificate in criminal law from DePaul University's College of Law. Author of a couple books, Israeli and Palestinian Postcards, Presentations of National Self, and Evil, quotation marks, Arabs and American Popular Film. Before the break, we were talking about you were assigned to a case or being brought in to a case that was going to be at GTMO. You were going through a security clearance to get a top national security clearance. And they were bringing up your sexuality and your past sexual partners, which is absolutely, for folks who don't know about the Lavender Scare, started as an executive order, for folks who don't know, by President Eisenhower to root out all the gays because they would be blackmailed by the communists. And a lot of people were kicked out of a lot of queer people were kicked out of service for the government. And it seems like you're going through the exact same thing in the 21st century, Dr.
Can
Semmerling.
you imagine? Can you imagine this still going on? Even though President Biden told us 2 years ago, this month, that it's a thing of the past.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what they tell the CIA asks me and says, or tells me that you must have been sleeping with men in the Middle East. There's a lot of handsome Arab men there. I'm like, that's not what I go to the Middle East for. I would never put my research in jeopardy like that. That's not what I'm here to do. So they told me then there's nothing wrong with being gay, but you must never tell those men in Guantanamo, the detainees, that you're gay. You must never tell them because we don't want you to be blackmailed. Okay, not a problem. So I have to go through a polygraph test to make sure that I was telling the truth, that and the whole works. But when I get on the team, I have to keep this secret. So now,
What was the nature? How are they defining blackmail in the sense of how would the defendants knowing that you were gay lead to blackmail?
okay, so basically, what they were talking in a generality when they were the CIA people who were in interrogating me for, I call it interrogation because the way they set it up, it looked like an interrogation. So, but what they were worried about was they said if you get caught overseas, you're going to tell stories. Say I go to Afghanistan and I get caught, that I would then spill beans on stuff. Or they didn't want the guys down in Guantanamo to know because they were fearful about what these men would know, or what they could say to other people, or they also felt that there was some danger there. So that's what they were feeling at the time. At least that's what I could tell that they were feeling at the time. When I got down to Guantanamo, I had to keep this quiet. So now and this is the thing. That's what Frank Kameny pointed out. Frank Kameny, the great, uh, the great protester for us in the 60s and 70s and 80s, he pointed out if you don't have a secret, then there's nothing to blackmail you with. Okay.
And Frank Kameny was kicked out during the Lavender Scare, for listeners, and was the first person to have a court case in front of the Supreme Court based off of sexual orientation, which of course he lost because, homophobia.
Right. And so Kameny points out, and he says, if you don't have a secret, then you don't have the blackmail. And so here now they created, this is what's so interesting. When they told me I could never say anything about it, boom, that creates the secret. Now there's a possibility, because I had already come clean, and I was a flight attendant living a very open life with my family and with my friends. But now they put me in. So when I get to Guantanamo and I'm working with the lead lawyer, the lead lawyer comes to my home one day and she sees my house and she says to me, "I have to ask you something." And okay, what is it? And she says, "Are you gay?" Now I'm stuck. And she says, "I have to know, because otherwise you could be in great danger, and you could put all of us in the team in danger if Mr. Benitez finds out who I was representing down there." And so I had to sit there and then say, "Yes, I am," because otherwise I'm putting everybody in danger and I could lose my job and everything else. And I said, "But the CIA people said they must never know, these people. Don't worry," she says. "Don't worry, we got it covered. Nobody will ever tell you. But I have to tell the second chair." So she tells the second chair. And the second chair says to me, "There are three things that you, Mr. Benitosh, can never find out about. And one is if you are Jewish. Two, if you've been to Iraq or Afghanistan fighting or even serving. And three, if you're gay, because those three things he will get rid of you off the team." And I was very adamant that he must never know. I told them as well, is that he can never know, because he was in Afghanistan when they're toppling brick walls on gay men, or or flogging. He believes in that, the flogging of men. His culture believes in that, and he's part of that. So, and he was there in Afghanistan when that stuff is happening. So now I got the second possibility for blackmail, right? The second lie. And as a friend of mine once says, "Well, you promised the CIA, you told the CIA, you told the lead lawyer, what could possibly go wrong?" So this then comes more to what the story is about that we're dealing with here. So so we are going through all that, and eventually that blackmail comes out. But the blackmail does not come out. It happens during when the lead lawyer starts to lose her job. And she feels that she needs to struggle to keep her job, and she's starting to get rid of people right and left, because she's trying to hold on to her own position. And then when they finally decide that they're going to get rid of me, they went into him and they told Mr. Benitosh that they had to get rid of me because, one, I was gay, and two, that there was a possibility that I was interested in him sexually. And so the blackmail doesn't come from Russia or from China or from al-Qaeda. And in my CIA interview, they were so worried the Israelis were going to blackmail me. That didn't come from them, from those places. It came from the United States itself. It was the United States themselves that went into al-Qaeda and turned over a gay citizen to al-Qaeda and told him these horrible things to raise his wrath against me. So, and to use his visceral his visceral homophobia against me. But that's not how it ends up. So,
How did what was the intention there, to undermine his defense so he would have a worse defense, or was it just basically the lead attorney trying to, in your estimation, hold on to the case?
the lead attorney and the second chair attorneys, they were very much wanting. You have to understand, Guantanamo is a bonanza. It is a bonanza. It is so much money that comes through. People are making $500,000 a year salary down there. The lead lawyers are.
Wow.
And they were wanting so badly to hold on to that position. Okay. And you're talking not only that, but you're talking these flying all over the world because the tentacles of 9/11 are all over the world. So we're flying to Warsaw, we're flying to, to Yemen, we're flying all over the world, staying at extraordinary hotels. And these two are ordering these fantastic seafood towers everywhere they go. And so what happens is that they are now, Mr. Vinatash gets, and then one of the things they try to do is they need to hold on to those positions. But they come up with this very twisted scheme, which is the scheme is the way to hold on to this is to make ourselves indispensable. And how to make ourselves indispensable is to be the most knowledgeable people on the team. So what they did was they would get people off, knock people off the team so that they had the longevity and that they would be the most knowledgeable people there, and the government would rely on them to do it. And so what they had to do is they had to control Mr. Binatosh. And so what they do is they use things like a torture technique, which is learned helplessness, where they try to get him so that he is so reliant upon him for everything that he can only come to them. And so when they start to see that their grip on him is falling and that he's moving more towards people like me or other people on the team and become reliant, not so much reliant, but becoming trusting of us, it made them very, very, very nervous. And so when it comes time for him to say he wants rid of the lead lawyer, there's this need to then find scapegoats. And so they start pushing more people off, and one of them was me, because he was becoming more trusting of me. And that comes through a lot of hard work and a lot of trust building of doing things and providing him with knowledge that I was providing to him and that he was providing to me. And so they thought that the best way to do this was to get rid of me. And where the blackmail comes in, when they decided to get rid of me, is they pulled me in. They said, "We want your resignation." And I sat there and I'm thinking, and they were really pushing for this resignation from me. And I sat there and I watched, and I thought, I'm in this crucible in this room of them demanding my resignation. And they wanted it so badly. And I say this in this manuscript that I wrote about this book manuscript I wrote for this experience. I said, I was in there and the Wizard of Oz came to my mind, and I thought, when Glenda says to Dorothy, stay inside those shoes because they want it, the Wicked Witch wants it so badly, there must be some great power in that. And I sat there and said, no, I won't give you my resignation. You'll have to fire me. And they fired me. And now what that did was that made them now have to go and tell him that they got rid of one of his most important people on his team. One of the people that he trusted so much. And so when they did that, they didn't know how to answer that. So what they did was they went and they had to tell him this horrible. They told him I was gay, and then they told him this horrible lie that I had sexual interest in him, and he needed to accept them because they were there to protect him from me. So that's what happens, but that's not how it ends. How it ends is this is what's so Lavender scary about it, right? Is that they do this kind of thing, and then they want to keep it secret. So they put in this secret motion. They put a motion in about me, of why they had to get rid of me. And so they put a motion in about me, and then called 380p, and they seal it, just like in Lavender Scare. They put out these statements and they have a file on you, and they seal it away from you so that you can never see it. And so I get all of a sudden this person from Washington says, I need to come out and see you, because I'm never supposed to know about this, right? It happens after I leave. Person comes out and says, I need to see you. It happens to be a low-level sergeant, flies out to Chicago and says, this is what they've done. Because it was so anathema to her moral feelings. And so she says, you got to do something about this. So we tried to do something about it. We were like, this can't possibly be true. And then I start digging up more and more stuff, and people start coming out more and more to Chicago to tell me about it, that it is true. But what happens is eventually somebody leaks to me a letter that comes to me, and it comes from the general's office, who's in charge of this whole thing. Somebody in his office leaks a letter to me saying, listen, you're going to want to read this. And if you want more information, let me know. I didn't want any more information. And I eventually read it. And what it was Mr. Binatash, the al-Qaeda man, who actually stepped up and said to the judge, everything in motion 380p, the sealed motion, is a lie.
Wow.
Dr. Semmerling is, he states that all the work I did, I was the best at my job, completing my work and all that. And he said that these lawyers are telling you lies and they're telling you things to mislead you from the truth. And he wanted an investigation in about why I was let go. He wanted all that to come out. And so that's where the story goes to, is that it wasn't al-Qaeda who even cared. They didn't care. KSM, who's supposed to be the mastermind of 9/11, he says, I'm responsible for 9/11 from A to Z, he says.
Can you hold that thought?
Sure.
Sorry, we've got a commercial break. I'm actually going to make an executive decision. I'm going to hold off my essay series for next week because I want to continue this conversation with Dr. Semmerling. So we are going to fit in one final break here, and we will be back with Dr. Semmerling afterwards. Be sure to keep it here to The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I am your host, John Parker. We are here with Dr. Tim Jon Semmerling. Dr. Semmerling, so you're saying before the break, you were sharing this twist of the story, is that the individual from al-Qaeda that you were defending asked the judge for an investigation into your firing. Pick up the story there if you can.
Yeah, he wanted an investigation into my firing. Now, you have to imagine, this is al-Qaeda who's actually defending a gay American citizen. Completely different from what you thought it would, what we've always been told about the myth of 9/11, right?
Mm-hmm.
So KSM, who is the mastermind, they say, of 9/11, he also had this, he wanted me to work with him very, very badly because I was doing really good work with him, with my client, Mr. Binatash. And so he wanted the same thing, but he knew I was gay. He knew because he could just sense it. He had spent many years living in the United States, and he could sense it. And his big joke to me all the time was, Tim, come sit, talk to me. And why aren't you married? And he'd laugh. Because he knew, but he didn't care. Even though despite all of the doctrine and all the writings and everything else that you hear and that they've done, it's in the end, it didn't matter. What they wanted was people who did good work. And so when my client writes this letter to the judge, they seal it. And my client says out in the middle, or my former client says out in the middle of the courtroom, I waived all my privilege on this. So he wants to make the government acknowledge the fact that they have lied, or that these lawyers have been lying to the court. So, and I got to tell you, John, this happens. Do you think that this is happening now? No, this happened 10 years ago when we were at our peak. When we were at our peak under the Obama period, under the Biden period. This is when it's all happening. And you did this show a while back about the Democratic Party and how the Democratic Party was, that's the best we have type of thing. I don't know if you remember that show that you were talking about. But, I went to my Democratic senators here in Illinois and I said, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. Duckworth sends me this pap letter that says, oh, I will fight for you in Congress if it ever comes up. And Durbin's office, they were hiding from me. They didn't want to talk to me. And then they said, well, we can't do anything about this because you didn't work for the government. I said, I'm an Illinois citizen. I'm a gay American and I'm a business owner in Illinois. And you can't talk to me to help me with this. So they all ran. And so I eventually wrote a book manuscript about it. And I'm very excited because we waited for 10 months 10 months to get this thing cleared through the government. And the CIA, it looks like they passed it. The Southern Command passed it with redactions. The Army passed it with, and I don't know if they put redactions. It only looks like the redactions are coming from the Southern Command. But the only group that's holding out on us was the military commissions, which is the lawyers.
Mhm.
And so they want to hide this thing. And so 7 hours before Pete Hegseth is then, confirmed, I get the actual pieces back, and here they had cleared them for open publication. I had an article that I'd written for the Advocate about it, and I wrote a book manuscript. Then I find that the article had no redactions whatsoever. They kept it for 10 months. And the 352-page manuscript comes back with 17 pages that are affected about it, which deal with very, very light things, because we had written it so well to make sure that there were no secret, top secret information that was being spilled on it. So now we have that done, and now we can now take this out to publishers and now have them do something about it. So we're doing that in the meantime. But they were trying to hide it. And what now this when we talk about the mitigation, just so you know, remember how I said that it shows this, this concern for others or whatever? This is what this al-Qaeda man did.
Mm-hmm.
He had a concern that I was being mistreated, and he had a concern that the truth was not coming out in an American court, which is not even a legitimate court for him.
Did you try filing a suit against either the firm that was you were working for, or the government?
Yes, we tried to file a suit from the government. We went to the government. We tried to go through the normal procedurals of, telling the DOD that this happened. Nothing. They kept it for a while, and they said, we're closing the case. We couldn't find anything that he did wrong. We went and we took it to all types of places with EEOC. Then when we realized that we couldn't went through these procedural administrative areas, we had to then file a suit. We filed a suit. We were kicked out because we didn't go through the Federal Tort Claims Act. We go back in to the district court. We file a suit again. And then the judge says, well, they had privilege. They could tell their client whatever they want to tell their client. And he says, and besides, this is nothing. He said, when he says, this is at best, it's just objectionable.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. That I was turned over because he didn't think about who they were turning me over to, the enemy of the United States, as a gay man. And so he says, so we had to go back and we tried to appeal it. We lost at the appeal. At the time, my lawyer went through a stroke and he was dying at the time. And so I realized, how do you fight Goliath? When you fight Goliath, you cannot fight him on his grounds. You have to go somewhere where he can't see you. Going through all those procedural areas, going through the courts, is fighting Goliath on his own terms. Come to me, fight me over here. And that's when I realized, where's my best possibility to fight? I was already writing books.
Yeah.
And I was writing my clients' stories. Why am I not writing my own story?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I not writing my own book? And so when we wrote this, we came out with it, and they tried to bury it through the pre-publication process. Now they hired some firm out in New York City. They hired a firm that claims that they do all this great work for gay LGBTQ rights. Henker and Fink, they hire. So they hire this group. They think that they're being very slick by hiring this group, and they say, and this group says
10
that.
seconds left.
Okay, the group says that. The group says that we're representing Mr. Benetosh, but we believe that he did not represent Mr. Benetosh at all.
Wow. Dr. Semmerling, thank you for joining us here today. We hope to see that book in publication very, very soon. We will connect with you folks to let you know how you can connect with Dr. Semmerling and his book. For now, the Matt McNeil Show is coming up next. Stay tuned after that.